Welcome. Hello, everybody, and a warm welcome to the webinar that we have today on the topic from theoretical to translational science. We'll be having a perspective from a vaccinology in training. This webinar is a series of planned webinars with the goal of providing information on available career options in the field of vaccinology. My name is Caroline Mata, the Vaccinology Workforce Development Program Strategy and Planning Manager at KEMRI-Wellcome Trust Research Programme, and together with my colleagues, Professor George Warimwe, Marianne, and Lavenda Nafula, we welcome you to this session. Before we start, a few housekeeping matters. Kindly note that this webinar is being recorded. Kindly feel free to use the chat option to share your questions during the presentation, and we will definitely address them during the question and answer session. We will have a few open slots for people to directly ask questions to the presenter. If your internet is stable, you can raise your hand and use the available icon. As earlier mentioned, this is a series of planned webinars with the goal of providing information on available career options in the field of vaccinology. This is being run under the KEMRI-Wellcome Trust Research Programme, which is a world-renowned health research unit of excellence based in Kilifi and Nairobi in Kenya, as well as Mbale in Uganda. Over the years, we have excelled in the use of novel ideas and collaborations to achieve better health for Africa, while also developing Africa's scientific leaders. Our vision of the program is to undertake cutting edge and novel research that is relevant to national, regional, and global needs. It is under this program that we have the Vaccinology Workforce Development Program that aims to expand the technical know-how and capacity of sustainable end-to-end vaccine research and development in Africa. We do this through training and knowledge exchange activities in the vaccinology ecosystem, and this involves areas such as target product profiling, research and discovery, clinical and clinical studies, biomanufacturing, regulatory affairs, and deployment. The workforce development is undertaken using three channels. One, through internships at human vaccine manufacturing institutes that aim at establishing mentorship schemes which link interns with senior vaccinologists and health market systems and engagement academics globally to share, strengthen experiences and research experiences in the vaccine R&D and manufacture so as to enhance career development. The second pathway is a fully funded 2-week master's level course in vaccinology, which is scheduled for June this year. Yes, that is presented both in English and in French to successful applicants. So please watch out for the call for application. And these applicants will be selected based on their direct involvement with vaccine research and their excellence in professional and academic achievement. The final pathway is through webinars such as this one, which target early career scientists, graduate and undergraduate university students in Africa to provide information on possible career options for university students so that they can make informed career decisions. The program is in alignment with the Africa Union Partnership for Africa Vaccine Manufacture, that is PAVM, and their ambition is to increase the local vaccine production to meet at least 60% of Africans' routine immunization needs by 2040 and strengthen the capacity of vaccine research, discovery, and manufacturing in Africa. This webinar series is part of this engagement. So today we're glad to have Bernadette, who will be discussing the topic of turning theoretical science into translational science, and she'll be giving us her perspective as a vaccinologist who's benefited from several of the pathways that I mentioned up ahead. So I will introduce Bernadette, who is a research officer at KEMRI-Wellcome Trust Research Programme. Her current work focuses on mosquito-borne viruses such as Rift Valley fever, chikungunya, and dengue, which continue to cause outbreaks across Kenya. Despite their impact, these infections remain under-researched, which is something Bernadette and her team are working to change by studying how widespread these infections are and helping to guide the development of tools like vaccines and diagnostics that can be used in real-world settings. Bernadette holds a Bachelor of Science in Microbiology and a Master of Science in immunology from Pan University, which is supported through a fellowship from the initiative to develop African research leaders. That's ideal. Her core interests lie in understanding how the immune system responds to virus infection and how the vaccines can be designed to provide stronger and long-lasting protection. Bernadette is passionate about translating science into better health outcomes, especially in low and middle income countries. Looking ahead, she aims to pursue further research training and continue contributing to global health solutions while also advocating for equitable access to vaccine and fostering inclusion, community-driven scientific progress. Over to you, Bernadette. Karibu.
Thanks, Caroline, for the warm introduction. And thank you all for attending this webinar today. So I'll just start by acknowledging and thanking my mentors, because I will not be here without the support and the mentorship that I've received from my mentors. And I'll begin by just reflecting in the sense that we have all been given vaccines at one point in time. But the question is, have we ever thought about where vaccines come from and how are they? I will take us through the behind the scenes of making vaccines with the main aim of peeling vaccinology to make it simpler in a sense that will help people to truly understand the field and to actually want to pursue something within the field. And so it all starts in a classroom by taking notes, understanding the science, and then thereafter applying the science in a real life setting. And so, as Caroline has introduced, I am Bernadette. My second name, Kutima, which basically means searching. And I'm truly living up to my name by being a researcher at KEMRI-Wellcome Trust Research Programme. And so what do I do other than advocating for equitable access to vaccines? And that this is through one experiment at a time. I'm part of a vibrant team where we are working to create and test simple tools to help and to help track viruses of public concern, and also to be able to spot outbreaks early so that we can be able to respond quickly. And something that you're also doing is that you're monitoring if you against the spreading SARS-CoV-2 or coronaviruses around the community. And something else that we're also doing is that we have a mini factory, and this factory, which is kind of like a small vaccine setup, we're able to grow and make antibodies, proteins, and viruses with the main aim of producing them in a safe and controlled process so that we can support the kind of research that we're doing, and especially addressing questions of public concern in our setting. And so did I know that I always wanted to be a researcher? No. I was just a clueless kid in love with science, but I didn't know what I wanted to do with science. And so while choosing a course to study, microbiology sounded sciencey enough for me to pursue. And so I ended up doing a Bachelor's of Science in Microbiology at Pan University. And in the very first year of study, I was not particularly interested in anything. I only wanted to pass my units and proceed to the next year of study. However, from the second to the fourth year of study, we were introduced to mentors who had a different mode of teaching compared to what we used to in the first year of study. And so these mentors had a background in research. And so the mode of teaching is that they wanted us to understand the science. But something else that they wanted us to do is identify the science in real life situations. And so I remember two modules in particular that really stood out to me at the time. One was genetics, which is basically the study of how we come to be, and immunology, which is the study of the human body and how our body responds to infections. And so what these mentors basically did is they wanted us to apply the science in real life settings. So for instance, if I take immunology as an example, what they would do is they would say, oh, so you have a flu and you have a headache and you have a fever. So what do you think your body is doing? So what do you think the flu is doing to your body? And what do you think your body is doing to the flu? And so having such scenarios, they really did spark an interest and a desire to want to know more, to want to learn more, to want to explore more, and to actually observe the science in the environment that I'm currently in. And so in the fourth year of study, what I also had was an opportunity to actually plan and run experiments. And so I was attached to a mentor who was interested in understanding the impact of human activity to the marine ecosystem. And being attached to the mentor, it involved coming up with questions and coming up with ways of investigating how human impact is being observed in the marine ecosystem. And so at the time, it was very rewarding coming up with questions, coming up with solutions to the kind of environment that you're in, and in this instance, towards the marine ecosystem. And so at the point, I thought I would actually want to do a career as a researcher. And so just before concluding my Bachelor's of Science in Microbiology, the initiative to develop African research leaders, which is based at KEMRI-Wellcome Trust, advertised for master studentships. And so the studentship at the time that they advertised for was for Masters of Science in Immunology, which would be done in partnership with KEMRI-Wellcome Trust and Pwani University. So at the time, two things really stood out for me during this call. One was immunology, which I really enjoyed. And the other thing was research, which is a career that at that point in time I was actually interested in pursuing. And so I did apply for the call and I got in as a Masters of Science in Immunology student in 2019. And something also stood out during the course while studying immunology. We had one mentor who, the approach that she used to teach was quite unorthodox. So she would expect us to go read the notes, and then when you come back to class, we will just be discussing scenarios and applying the knowledge that we have read into the scenarios of real life situations. And so having that exposure and having that experience, it was really eye-opening. And one of the very many classes that I really enjoyed were classes that we talked about vaccines and for how they began, why they began, and how they impact human health. And so in other scenarios, we would actually pick a disease and then we'd make a vaccine from scratch, in theory, all the way to the pipeline, then take it through the entire pipeline up to the very end of getting a vaccine and actually now saying, okay, think now this, we can take it to the community. And so this really did spark an interest in just wanting to do more in vaccines. And so I had a chance to actually live out my textbook dream of making vaccines. And so at the time I worked with George Warimwe and James Nyagwange. And the main aim for the work was to design a potential dengue vaccine by targeting the key parts of the virus because dengue was causing a lot of problems in the community. And we did think at the time that dengue would be a potential candidate to actually alleviate on the challenges that you're experiencing. And so this was going on very well until the COVID-19 pandemic hit. And so what this meant was that I had to shelve or put a pin on my dengue vaccine and just transition directly into the workforce with the main aim of supporting the studies that were interested in understanding the COVID-19 pandemic in our context. And so turns out pandemics are just not in history books. So COVID-19 did tell us clearly that, yeah, pandemics are a thing that are part and parcel of our society. And so very quickly with COVID-19, having seen the impact that it was causing on a global scale, the main aim for researchers was to come up with a plan to try and mitigate the problems that were being experienced. And so one of the main things that have always been consistent in solving challenges that involve human health is vaccines. And so vaccines being an option to protect individuals against severe disease to COVID-19, they were made and they came quite early compared to what you have experienced with other diseases. And so the vaccines were available at the time, but something else stood out at the time was that, yeah, the vaccines are there, but we as Africans, we are not getting vaccines. So the question was why? And so what happened at the time was that the vaccines were available, but are only available in the high income countries. And countries like Kenya, for instance, here in Africa, we got vaccines like way later. And one of the main issues for this was manufacturing capacity because the capacity was limited to only the companies that had the right to make the vaccine. And so because of that, then the quantity or the amount that is being produced was not enough to meet the needs for those in the high income countries and those of us in Africa. And so later on, as the pandemic progressed, we did see an increase in the production of vaccines that finally got to us. But when we had the vaccines, something else really stood out at the point in time was that we had a very poor health system. In that, yes, we have the vaccines, but it was available in the urban setting. So people in the marginalized regions, like for our case in Kenya, in areas such as Moyale, Mandera, they could not have access to these vaccines. And so the main challenges that you're experiencing with COVID-19 did result to a lot of loss and grief and uncertainty. And I think many questions were arisen at the point in time of, so what do we do? As Africans, this is COVID-19 pandemic, but there are pandemics that, as we have seen, could come in the future. So what is our plan and what is the next phase of action? And so that brings about the efforts that have been done to expand access to vaccines. And I use the African Renaissance Monument as a symbol of hope, in that there are plans to actually transform vaccine manufacturing in Africa from research to development and to innovation. And the African Union's vision is that by 2040, Africa should be able to produce at least 60% of its vaccines of the vaccine needs in the continent, and made it locally. And one of the ways in which the African Union is trying to do this, or the various individuals and partners who are interested in making this vision become a reality, is by doing workforce training. So imparting knowledge into individuals to understand the vaccine development pipeline, and also involving regional collaborators to actually accelerate vaccine manufacturing capacity here in Africa. And something else that also stands out is that we do need to have local ownership for vaccine manufacturing, and to have sustainable supply chains, and also improve on vaccination, on immunization programs. And so, just as Caroline has mentioned, one of the things that KEMRI-Wellcome Trust is doing that goes hand in hand with the vision by the African Union is that it wants to improve workforce development. And one of the things that it's doing is there's a Vaccinology in Africa course. And the main reason for this course is it's aimed at attracting participants across Africa with an interest in vaccine research, development, and manufacturing. And so how the course is designed is it's the master's level course that takes the participants through the entire vaccine development pipeline. And so the design of the course is that it attracts facilitators or lecturers, or I would say mentors, who are already in the vaccine space. And so what they would do is, one, first give us the lowdown on the kind of, on the vaccine development pipeline, the kind of status that we currently have. But we as Africans contribute by trying to identify gaps within our setting and what you'd want to mitigate or improve, so that you can at least have vaccine manufacturing here in Africa. And something else that also stands out within the Vaccinology in Africa course is that you are networking with people from different walks of life, and these individuals, bearing in mind that they're coming from different parts of the country or different parts of the world, or Africa in this instance, we do share similar stories. In some instances, some stories are better than others, but all in all, we all share the same interest, that we want to improve vaccine manufacturing here in Africa. And so I did participate in Vaccinology in Africa course. I was in the class of 2024. And I think during the entire course, I think there are two main concepts that I think are important for anyone who wants to pursue a career in vaccinology, or for anyone who wants to make vaccines. And I'll go through two concepts in this instance. And one thing to note for sure is, if you want to make vaccines, not all the vaccines that you want to make will actually get to your family and friends. And the main reason for this is vaccines are very expensive to make. They require a lot of resources, they require a lot of funding. And so you really have to justify a need for a vaccine before you even want to make it. And so I will use the dengue vaccine that I did make, or that we're trying to make during the master's project, to try and illustrate or explain the vaccine value of death. And so, as Bernadette, I'm really interested in making dengue vaccine. And the main aim for this is, I want to prevent guys from getting dengue virus infection. And so what I think would work best would be vaccines. But I think the main question would be, do we really need a dengue vaccine? And one of the ways to answer that question is through basic research. So I, as a researcher, would need to apply for funding to try and understand, number one, dengue virus and its implications here in Africa or in the world, in the global context, and what sort of impact does dengue virus pose to the population that warrants a vaccine? And if not a vaccine, what other strategies are being utilized to protect individuals from dengue virus? And so, beyond reasonable doubt, if I prove that a vaccine is warranted to protect people against dengue virus, the next thing would come up with a candidate vaccine, which is through concept research, which also depends on funding. So I'll have to apply for funding to also try and figure out which parts of the virus within the dengue virus that I can make a vaccine for, so that it can protect people from disease. And so, as a researcher, these are interesting topics that we cover the sense, in a sense, makes a lot of sense because we do see the impact of dengue in the population, and you do see the need of making dengue vaccine to protect people from infection. But the main question at the point is, do you have the money to sustain this idea? So there's a minimum amount of investment that is needed to actually sustain that idea. And so because it's just an idea and I've not translated it into a vaccine that directly goes to the community, I'll have to seek out funding through manufacturing plants, because they're the ones who have the money, they're the ones who have the capital, they have the resources to make this vaccine. So with all the evidence that I've gathered to prove that truly dengue is a problem and truly we need a vaccine, I approach the manufacturer and give them the idea that, yeah, we see dengue as a problem, we want to make a vaccine for dengue, and we want to partner with you in making this vaccine. So what the manufacturer does is that for the manufacturer just to make economic sense for them to actually pump money into your idea. And one of the things that the manufacturer is looking at is their buying power. So if I make this dengue vaccine, who is going to buy that vaccine? And yes, you show that there are people who do suffer from dengue virus, but the question is, what is the population size of these people who are struggling with dengue? And so the manufacturer does make the mathematical calculations and see, with the kind of money that I'm pumping into your idea, does it make economic sense to me in the sense that I'm going to get a return on my investment? And so if the manufacturer sees that there is return on investment on your idea, then they will partner with you and they will move forward with the idea to try and get the vaccine out to the community. But if you are unable to convince the manufacturer and the manufacturer sees with the evidence that you're provided, it's just not enough. It's not enough for them to want to pump money into your idea. And there could be many reasons as to why this is the case. One, they could say, oh, you say dengue is a problem, but to us, we don't think there's enough buying power for us to make, or for us to even invest in making the dengue vaccine. So for us, it's a no. And so what happens to my idea of making dengue vaccines? It goes into the valley of death. And so the valley of death basically has majority of promising vaccine candidates that would have otherwise been successful from a research standpoint, but did not make economic sense to the manufacturer. And so let's say it does make economic sense to the manufacturer and they want to partner with me. There are also many instances where a promising candidate vaccine fails to progress beyond the early stages. And the main reasons that contribute to that is that we have scientific, let's say you've tested the candidate, but there's not enough scientific evidence to prove that your vaccine is truly going to protect people against infection, then your vaccine stops production. We go into the financial obligations. The manufacturer observes that we are pumping a lot of money into this, but we cannot postulate the return on investment that would work best for us. So funding is cut. And so that basically means your vaccine also goes into the valley of death. The other regulatory issues, because your vaccine has to go through regulation so that it can be approved and so that it can be taken for people to use into the community. If it fails to tick the boxes within the regulation, then your vaccine fails and goes into the valley of death. And other things such as logistical barriers. And I'll give an example with the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine, because that vaccine needs to be shipped in cold chain. By cold chain, I mean it needs to be shipped within temperatures such as -70. So I'm looking at it from a standpoint of us as Africa. Do we have the logistic capability of carrying out or shipping these vaccines and getting them to the consumer? No, we don't. So that it will make it a logistic nightmare for a funder to pump money into your idea. And so supposedly your vaccine goes through this pipeline and the manufacturer is happy to contribute to making your idea into a reality, and they want to make actually a dengue vaccine with you. One thing that you need to know as somebody who wants to do vaccines or want to make vaccines is that your vaccine has to go through a life cycle. And so the vaccine life cycle is basically a set of trials that your vaccine has to go through to test and see whether it will be good enough for use in the community. And so what the manufacturer does is the manufacturer makes a small batch that can be used to test in animal models. And so with the animal models, the main aim in this instance is to test and see that the vaccine candidate can actually produce the response that you want it to produce. And so you test it in animals. And if this is successful, then that informs phase 1. So phase 1 trial is basically a trial where we invite healthy individuals. And our main interest in this instance is to test the safety of that vaccine. Can it be used by human beings? And so if this test, if this trial, if your vaccine passes this phase 1 trial, it then goes to phase 2 trial, where you invite again hundreds of volunteers who are healthy individuals. And the main aim for this trial is to test the vaccine, whether it's still safe for use in human beings, and also to test that the response that you want it to raise, it's also raising that response in human beings. In that, is the vaccine protecting people from the dengue virus that you are interested in protecting them from? And if it does pass that, it goes on to phase 3. And phase 3, what phase 3 does is that now the vaccine is taken to the to individuals, where thousands of individuals are recruited with the main aim of checking whether that vaccine is efficacious. And by efficacious, we mean that because my interest is to test and see whether that vaccine is good enough to prevent people from getting exposure to the dengue virus. The main aim will be to target individuals who are actually at high risk of getting dengue virus. And so that's what this trial does. It tests whether your vaccine is able to do that. And so if it passes through these tests, it then goes into approval, and then finally into production, and then, of course, safety and monitoring before it's given to the community. So traditionally, this used to take 10 to 15 years before you get your vaccine product. But currently, because of COVID-19, which was a blessing and a curse in a sense, because with the COVID-19, we did see a reduction in that life cycle to between 12 to 18 months. And I think at the point in time, the main aim for this reduction in time was, one, COVID-19 was a problem. And of course, we have seen time immemorial that vaccines have always worked. And so vaccines were the main strategy to protect people against severe disease in COVID-19. And so this cycle was reduced to 12 to 18 months. And so in the vaccinology field right now, this is really a plus, because now we now see that it is actually possible to get vaccines into the population as quickly as possible as what it was before. And so because the chances that we are going to see a future pandemic in the vaccinology field, we now want to actually make vaccines as quickly as possible and get it as quickly as possible to the community or to the individuals who are at risk of infection. And so from the vaccinology course, we get to do all these things in theoretical aspect, but there are instances where the KEMRI-Wellcome Trust has also partnered with research labs or manufacturing plants that are able to take the individuals who are interested in pursuing a career in vaccinology into apprenticeships. And so apprenticeships are basically hands-on experience where you'll do practical work that takes you through the entire vaccine development pipeline. And so there'll be lab work involved to learn how the vaccines are made. And in the factories within which that you'll be in, you'll be there to learn and understand how your body responds to the types of vaccines that they're making. They'll also teach you about the vaccine designs all the way to approval processes. And in some instances, there are some labs that actually have the clinical trials, and most probably you'll get trials that test the candidates or the vaccines in animal models before taking them to individuals. Another skills that you'll gain on an apprenticeship is that you'll learn to analyze the data and the lab experiments and the trials that you're doing. And something else that you'll also learn is writing reports and presenting the findings. Because at the end of the day, the main aim is to get these vaccines to the community. So if you cannot communicate your vaccine to the community, then as a researcher, that's a loss. And also as a community, that's a loss, because something that would have been problem solving now ends up in a shelf. Something else that you'll also go through in an apprenticeship is you'll get familiar with the ethics and the safety of the vaccine research, and more importantly, mentorship. Because just as I've shown you, the vaccinology field is really broad and wide. And so the various aspects that will spark an interest in you. So for me, it is vaccine design and preclinical trials. For somebody else, it could be clinical trials. For another person, it could be regulation and safety. And so mentorship helps to steer you into the field or into the aspect of vaccinology that you do want to pursue. And this, you'll get it in an apprenticeship. So what has my journey so far taught me, in the sense of wanting to be a vaccinologist with the main aim of helping the community to address the public health concerns that are currently there through vaccines? One is that growth takes time. I can't tell you how many times I've tried to understand a concept. So you can imagine how difficult it is to, one, understand the concept and actually translate that concept into a real life setting. And so I do understand, or I've truly appreciated that you can't rush progress. You'll have to take time to understand the concepts that you'll apply in the different aspects of vaccinology that you'd want to pursue. Something else that I've also learned is that you have learned ask questions, because innovation is born from asking questions, and all the challenges that we face here in this world, they come from asking questions. And so asking questions will help put your ideas into perspective, and more so it will come into innovation and hopefully into solutions into the public health problems that we have. Something else that I've also learned is flexibility, which will always beat perfection. And I'm just looking back at the point in time when I was making a dengue vaccine, and then COVID happened. We had to shift our thinking from dengue vaccine to COVID-19 to understand COVID-19 and its implication in our setting. So as a researcher, as somebody who's interested in vaccines, you have to be adaptable and utilize the skills that you have into solving the problems that currently face the community. Something else that has, of course, stood out, especially through the COVID-19 pandemics, that teamwork will always make the science work. Because without the collaboration that we have seen throughout the years, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, then we would not see the successes that you're seeing right now. But all in all, imposter syndrome is real. And I think this is something that most of us do face. We feel like we do not have enough information to truly stand in a platform and explain the work. And so imposter syndrome is something that will hit us in bouts or waves. But how you counter that is you also have to understand that even the experts, or people who you look at and you think they are experts, they had to sit in a class at one point. They had to understand the science at one point. They had to learn the science and interpret the science to make the choices that they're able to make with regards to solving the world health problems that we have now. And so little wins, they matter. You do not have to have a huge step. It could be as little as wanting or having a desire to want to pursue a career in vaccinology. That's a win, because it shows you have a desire for something. And so purpose will always keep you going. And for me, purpose is very important because, one, my parents always say that the best inheritance that they can give me is education. For me, I always say the best inheritance that I can give my children is vaccines. And recently I was having a conversation with a friend, and we were just thinking to ourselves, imagine if we did not have the vaccines that we have now. Your parents would basically have a calendar of all the diseases that could probably have exposure to. And what they'll be doing is that, oh, John has survived whooping cough this year. Let's hope that John survives diphtheria next year. And it sounds strange in a dystopian kind of way, but that's the reality that people lived in before these vaccines came into working for our society. And so purpose will always keep you going. And if all the science has not stirred an interest to want to study vaccinology, or to want to make vaccines, or to want to advocate for vaccines, then I leave you with this phrase to ponder and to think about. So vaccinology is basically the science that meets service, and knowledge becomes lab in action. Thank you for listening.
Thank you
Over to
very
you.
much for that. Thanks, Bernadette. That was quite interesting. And I love how you've broken down the concepts into very easily understandable ideas, and you're doing a fantastic job at it. I will open up the platform for any questions or queries that we may have from the audience. Please either raise your hand or you can put something in the chat box. Any questions from the audience? Mariam, I can see your hand up. Please unmute and ask your question. Please unmute. I have enabled you. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. An excellent talk, Bernadette. My name is Miriam, and I'm an epidemiologist. So from once vaccines are manufactured and then they're brought to the public, what we are mostly concerned about is the waning of vaccines efficacy. So I wonder, from a vaccine development perspective, what can you do to strengthen our vaccines such that they have longer efficacy in the population? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. I look at it from the place of the only way we know that there's winning is by carrying out research. And so the best thing that we can do as people who want to make vaccines that last longer and are more effective to the population is by doing more research. So unfortunately, it's all tied to getting funding, studying these vaccines and how our bodies respond to these vaccines so that we can come up with better strategies. And it's all tied to research. And so by strengthening the research capacity, then we'll be able to answer questions of how else can we improve these vaccines to make it last longer in the population. And I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. I can see we have Abdullahi Babatunde. Please unmute. Let us know where you're calling in from and what your cadre is. Are you a student? Are you an early career scientist? And where are you coming in from? Go ahead.
Okay. Good morning. Can you hear me? Yeah. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. So, good morning, Bernadette. That was a good presentation, and I quite learned a lot from your deep and in-depth insight as regarding vaccinology. And I must also confess that you have been doing a great job, and we really commend you for that. So, I'm Dr. Abdullahi Babatunde from Nigeria. A veterinarian by profession, and my field of specialty is the viral epidemiology using molecular diagnostics for zoonotic infectious disease. So these are my few questions. Number one, during the course of your discussion, I found out that the major issue we are having as regarding having our own locally manufactured vaccine in Africa generally is basically funds. I mean, finance to actually to be able to do that. Because yesterday, the African CDC Director General had a weekly briefing with us, and that was one of the major things he also, talked about. And during the course of your presentation, you also highlighted the solution through the vaccine valley that you talked about. But I also love you to expatiate more on that. How can we, really solve this problem so that we avoid this issue of excess interdependency on international experts and for their own funds and resources? That's my first question. And my second question is, I, as a viral epidemiologist, I'm currently a master's student doing my postgraduate studies. So how do I interlink with the field of vaccinology? Because I truly love helping humanity, and the purpose of my epidemiological and molecular studies is to be able to, go deep down to molecular studies to be able to solve many of the issues that we have in terms of infectious disease around the world. So as a viral epidemiology with intersection with molecular diagnostics, and how do I link up with you in your field? How do we link together? That's my second question. And then that will lead me to the third question. While Miss was doing the introduction, she made mention of some things like the pathway to come to KEMRI. So I want to ask, are there internship opportunities? You mentioned masters for VCA, and then are there also scholarship opportunity, so that we can train ourselves locally as Africans to become experts so that we don't have to depend more on the international guys. So are there opportunities for that? Because if there is, I would personally love and interested to really also diversify into that field and for the betterment of public health as a whole, and then solving humanity problem. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the questions. I will address these questions from a perspective kind of view, and I do apologize to the experts in the room who will probably look at my answers and question but you can also contribute to the questions that are being posed. And so when it comes to addressing the funding issues, especially when it comes to making vaccines, I don't know how we are going to try to address that. The only way that I've seen other countries do it is that government has to be involved. The government has to have and has to want to have a stake in wanting to improve the health outcomes of its people. And so a lot of money that is pumped towards making vaccines, it kind of needs to be also fed in through our government. The government has to want to say, okay, the researchers are interested in making vaccines, let's support them. Without that support, we're not going to have any sustainability, because at the end of the day, even we as researchers, we do depend on funding from external sources. We are not funded, most of the times we're not funded by the government. And so I feel like that's the bit where we as Africans are missing. There's not enough, how do I say? There's not enough desire to want to make our systems better. And I feel like this is in a sense, we do play a role because we are responsible in choosing the leaders that represent us. So if we make it much of a problem to the leaders, in as much as it's a problem to us, then it's going to be part of the system, and we want to advocate for that. What you've also mentioned is that you're doing viral epidemiology. It plays a huge role in vaccinology, because what the viral epidemiologist does is that you're gathering evidence to truly prove beyond reasonable doubt that the viruses that are circulating in the environment are of public concern and that we need to do something about it. So by just getting the evidence, that is enough justification in the sense that you are part and parcel of vaccinology, in as much as you're not making the vaccine, because we do use the evidence that you gather to build a case for the need of vaccines for some of these viruses. And so you are playing a part and parcel in contributing into making vaccinology be where it is right now. You have also mentioned that funding opportunities. Yes, KEMRI-Wellcome Trust does advertise for opportunities, be it PhD, internships, and now with the vaccinology development workforce, where there's the vaccinology in Africa course and the apprenticeships. And so once those calls are open, they're open to anyone for application who may be interested in pursuing a field in vaccinology. And so I'd welcome you to try them once they are advertised.
Yeah, maybe what I can add on to that is, yes, we do provide those courses. And I had mentioned earlier, we have different pathways. So that the apprenticeships that we are currently ongoing. And all these platforms always have call for applications that we normally post on the KEMRI-Wellcome Trust Research Programme website. So just keep a lookout for that. But we do have apprenticeships where we do place upcoming early careers scientists and students in manufacturing entities for between a month to 1 year, where they get hands-on experiences and learning opportunities, where they get mentored by technical experts in those fields. We also have webinars such as this, where we share this information so that then it reaches out to a wider audience using technology, so that they're also able to get the information, because then this is how information gets shared, and you're able to reach out to the people who are interested, and they actually know that those opportunities exist. And we also have, so such webinars also give you tidbits, little topics that we spend about an hour every month, just giving out information about vaccinology and the potential career paths that you could take. We also have for undergraduate students and also students in high school, we have school engagement programs where we get to meet with you either during career days. We are able to have those conversations on what are the choices as you're making the choices in your subjects. What are the potential career paths that you could engage in based on the subject selection that you're doing, so that when you're doing your subject selection, it's more informed. You know, this is what I'm interested in, or no, this is not my cup of tea. I'll go do something else. And all these are fully funded, including the vaccinology course, which is a 1 week or 2 week on-site practical training, where we're now bringing the experts into one particular area. This year in Judith, we're going to be in Senegal, where we get all the technical experts in one room with the beneficiaries, with the students, and there's that whole interaction of anything from regulatory affairs to running clinical trials to research and development. And it's very intense, it's very technically intense. So that's why it's mostly limited to master's students who are working already within the vaccinology space and just want to enhance the expertise that they already have. So yes, always keep all these things are posted onto the KEMRI-Wellcome Trust website. Just keep a heads up on that, because then a few of them will be coming out very soon, and they are highly competitive. So yeah, all the best to all the ones who will be able to apply. The other thing that maybe I can suggest is if you're able to bring on board other early career students and mentors, a blend of both, and have use social media, use WhatsApp groups, because then that's also where opportunities are posted, because then you're all within a certain interest group and diverse within the continent. So anytime an opportunity comes up, either within South Africa or Egypt or Morocco or in Senegal, then all that is shared within a WhatsApp group where you're also able to catch more opportunities other than just what KEMRI-Wellcome Trust is offering. So those are the suggestions that I would give for the ones who are querying whether there's such opportunities and how they can get on board. And I hope that is helpful. Bernadette, I can see a question for you by Arnold, who has asked, what are the potential strategies to try avoid the valley of death? Seems like most of the hard work in basic research is going down the drain.
Yeah, so the problem with the valley of death is that unfortunately you will need a manufacturer to want to invest in your idea. And the only way we can maneuver that is that we ourselves make it in such a way that we do not depend on the manufacturers, in the sense that they have their own interest. So if we can have funds that are given most of the time with the support from the government, because with the government there's sustainability, because that means in their budgetary allocations they will budget for money that actually goes to those things. Because for the manufacturer, it needs to make economic sense for them to want to invest. But if the disease is only localized in Kilifi, there's no way they're going to make a vaccine for only people in Kilifi. So unfortunately, the government has to be part and parcel in this process, because with the budgetary allocations, we can easily justify the need to make doses that would be essential in our environment. But without that, we will always wait on a disease that is problematic enough for the manufacturers to make the vaccines for us to use. So unfortunately, I don't know how we are going to breach that, but first things first, let's put the proper governments in place and advocate for more funding for research and vaccine development.
I can also see my colleague Marianne is posting quite a number of useful links on the chat, so just to take a note of that. And yeah, thank you very much. And we have my question. So this is from Nasis. Good to see you, Nasis. Very interesting presentation. My question is, what can be the research access orientation and your advice to attract funding for beginners? Nasis is a research scientist from Singapore. He is currently one of our beneficiaries, and he is posted at Hilleman Labs in Singapore. Over to you, Bernadette. How would beginners attract funding?
So for what I've seen in the kind of environment that I'm in right now, the best way to attract funding is to collaborate. Because even if I would want to go to a funder and ask a funder to fund me for the kind of research that I'm doing, I have no track record of handling funds. I have no track record of setting up experiments or setting up studies. But the only way I can get funding is to collaborate with somebody else who has done. So what I've seen in this environment is that collaborate by scientists coming up together and collaborating towards the ideas that they want to explore, it gives them a better chance of getting funding as compared to you pursuing it as an individual. And that's why I say teamwork makes the science work, because it's easier to justify to the funder to fund your research. And so if you can find collaborators who are working or have the same sort of ideas that you'd want to pursue in form of research, then the best would be to talk to them and have something up that you can give to the funders, and hopefully you get funded for the kind of work that you want to do.
Thank you for that, Bernadette. We have a question from Derek Kimathi, who is asking, what are your thoughts on capacity development in the region for vaccine sustainability, from discovery to licensure of vaccines beyond human capacity? Oh, so the second question is, beyond human capacity, what would you lobby for prioritization when developing capacity? What would be your priority, and what are your thoughts on capacity development in the region?
Derek, you're really putting me on a spot, but what I would lobby for, I'll start with what I would lobby for. What would I lobby for? I just want, to be honest, in the kind of setting that that we are currently in right now, I would just want for our governments to take our work seriously, because if they take it seriously, then the amount of time and effort that is put, that goes towards it, will be prioritized, and the work that we do will not go to waste. It will not go into manuscripts and theses, and then that's it, and that's the end of it. So I would lobby for governments to actually wake up and realize that COVID-19 was an example of what will happen if we are not prepared. And so by them deciding to actually put in the money and the energy and the effort into research, then that would be something that I would honestly hope that all governments realize and decide to do. For with regards to the workforce, when in essence to manufacturing and capacity in Africa, so that's the one thing that you are asking when we were, I think when you were seeing the apprenticeships concerning vaccinology. So if I go to, let's say, the Pfizer labs or the Pfizer manufacturing plant, and I get the skills to make vaccines, and then I come back to Africa, what am I coming back to? And I think that is why right now the main aim for here in Africa is first set up those manufacturing plants and see the feasibility of setting up those plants to enable those people who go to the workforce, who learn the skills, who get the skills to make vaccines or do the regulation and all the aspects that are involved in vaccines. Then they will come back home and actually now utilize and apply their skills here in Africa. Because currently, right now, if I was to gain as much skill as possible, I still don't see where I can apply it here in Africa. So I'll still have to be based into the labs that are currently, or in areas where they're currently applying that skill. But at least there is the hope, and there are plans that they will set up these plans. And so we can keep on building up the capacity with the hope that in a few years, those facilities will be by Africans for Africans. Those are my thoughts.
Thanks for that. We have Innocent Abai. Kindly unmute and ask your question. I can see your hand up. Can you hear us, Innocent? Okay, as we wait, we have Godwin Ngeno. Kindly unmute. Okay. Godwin has texted, and he is a third-year student from Masinde Muliro University of Science and Technology, pursuing a Bachelor of Science in Medical Biotechnology. And he has a couple of questions. One, how do mRNA vaccines compare to traditional vaccines in terms of efficacy and safety? And then the second question that he has is, how can vaccine hesitancy be addressed effectively in rural or conservative communities? That's it, Bernadette.
Thanks for those questions. And so I think for mRNA vaccine, I think it's dependent on what you want to address. Because what I'm thinking of is unless I'm testing that mRNA, because it is a type of a vaccine design that you can use to make the vaccine. So is the question in alignment to the same pathogen? Because the only way I can compare how the mRNA vaccine compares to other vaccines is if I'm having the same disease. So in the context of SARS-CoV of COVID-19, we did have mRNA vaccines and we did have vaccines that had like the subunit vaccines. And so comparing the two, in essence, what you're seeing is that there's no significant difference between responses between the two vaccines. They were both comparable. They both made the immune system rise a response that would protect an individual towards infection. So in the context of COVID-19, we didn't see any significant difference between what has been used before and the mRNA vaccines. I can't seem to remember the next question. What was the next question?
The next question was, how can vaccine hesitancy be addressed effectively in rural or conservative communities?
Yeah, so vaccine hesitancy, most of the time it's because of misinformation, or I would like to think it's because of misinformation. And that is why there's an aspect of science that is called that's called science communication. And science communication basically breaks down all the work that we're doing here in the lab to make it as easy and as palatable to anyone outside the science space. And so by advocating for more community science aspects, in that we incorporate all these aspects of breaking down the information to be as easy as possible to be understood by your friend, by your family, by your parent, then it would make vaccine hesitancy go down, because at least you will tell them from a standpoint of what you have done, what you're currently doing, and what are the issues that might arise and also address the questions that they have with regards to whether that vaccine is going to cause a problem or not. So the field of science communication helps with that. It helps reduce vaccine hesitancy. And so I also think that the media does play a role in that. If they're to publicize information that pertains science, that pertains vaccines, then they ought to partner with those in the research space, because by partnering with them, then the information that is going to be packaged and palleted to and given to the community would be in line with what is real. Otherwise, we do see so many instances of misinformation that unfortunately is hard to counter. But the best we can do is that we can digest that information to make it easier and make it available to anyone who may want to understand what we do.
Okay. There's a question from Jerry. What is the best way to navigate challenges that occur in development of vaccines that have high mutational rates? What would you say about that?
The only way I can respond to this is through research, because hypothetically speaking, we do see viruses that have a lot of mutation. For instance, HIV. Now with COVID-19, we do see the virus changing a lot. But the only way we can address those challenges is by spending a time actually studying those viruses, and for us figuring out what parts or bits of the viruses can we use to counter the mutations that are happening. And if the mutations are happening, would they impact the vaccine candidates that you're interested in making? And can you target specific parts that do not have mutations, but also elicit or help the body to produce protection? So this person, in as much as the virus is mutating, they're still protected through with the vaccine that you'd already made. So only research can address these questions. Yeah, I think that's what I can say concerning that.
Producing evidence that is able to help make the decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Leonard has an interesting question here. He says, thank you for the insightful talk. While funding is a big barrier, let's assume for a moment that funding is fully addressed. Do you think communities in Africa would easily trust and adopt vaccines developed and manufactured locally, given the existing confidence in big pharmaceutical company brands like Pfizer? In your view, how do we start building that trust and effectively engaging communities to embrace African-led vaccine solutions? I like that question.
Yeah. Yeah, let's say we have solved all the problems that relate to money. Yeah, I do see a problem that would arise because I'm just looking at it in just a basic scenario. If you look at the different countries here in Africa, we all have different bodies that give regulation with regards to what we put in our bodies, either drugs or vaccines. So in Kenya, it's the Kenya Poisons and Pharmacy Board. I think that's the proper name. In Uganda, it's something else. In Tanzania, it's something else. And so if you make a vaccine here in Kenya, you want to sell it to the Ugandans. The Ugandans accept the vaccine and say, okay, we are happy with what you've done. We are happy with the regulation and we're okay to buy the vaccine and use it for our community. I do see challenges arise. And just as you've mentioned, there will be challenges with regards to trust. But the best thing that we can do is we start with what is the main goal for us as Africans? If our main goal is to have vaccines that we make and that are easily affordable and available to our people here in the population, then we as Africans have to come together and decide what we want to do. Because of course there will be challenges that arise with segregation. So we have to collaborate as a team. We have to come up with and we also have to work with partner labs or partner institutions like the WHO, among other companies that already had those regulations put down. And for our case as Africans, have a committee or a group of people or a group of individuals from the various parts of the country that marry whatever has already been done into our setting. Because at the end of the day, we cannot work in isolation. And because we cannot work in isolation, we have to do everything as a team. And so hopefully by us understanding the importance of us having a vaccine as a community and as a society, and for vaccines made by Africans for Africans, then we can maneuver the hurdles of trust by setting up standards through collaborative partners. That's what I would think, but that's how I would want to approach it. Yeah.
Okay. Let me ask you a very charged question here from Rama.
Yeah.
Given the growing call for decolonizing global health research,
Yeah.
how would we ensure that the community-based vaccine trials in the global south are not just merely extensions of high-income research agendas, but are shaped by local priorities and epidemiological realities?
Wow. Yeah.
I think this is a
So
whole topic on its own.
yeah, I feel like the questions that are asked are very expert oriented, and I'm like, I'm trying to get all the points that I could possibly think of. So yeah, there is that risk that the vaccine's available, and then they say, let's take the clinical trials to Africa to test the vaccine. And I do see why you'd ask that question. Why are they testing this vaccine in our setting, and why not test in their setting? And from that point on, we make a decision based on what they do in their setting. We have to think of this like beyond the selfish interests that lie at hand. We have seen that at some point, vaccines that have been tested in the European world or in the developed nation, they're tested there, we find them very efficacious, but when they come to Africa, that's not the case. And I think the main reason as to why they set up trials here in Africa is because, one, we have a very different system. In our setting, we have so many pathogens that we are exposed to that would influence the immune response that you mount with regards to the vaccine that you're being given. And so them setting up trials here in Africa is to understand in our setting, with all the exposure that we have to helminths, to malaria, to bacteria, among other things, can we still have the same response that we are seeing in the developing world where there are not many diseases that are circulating in their population? So for me, how I see clinical trials in Africa is to just try and harmonize or try and actually study the vaccine candidates to better target candidates that would impact health so that we are protected just as people in the developing world are protected. And so there are instances, just as you mentioned, where you feel like the underlying concerns or the underlying or selfish interests that are used to make these vaccine trials happen here in Africa But I would challenge us to think beyond that. What other questions are they trying to answer by having clinical trials here in Africa, as opposed to the selfish interest at hand? What else can we gain by having these clinical trials here in Africa? And also, clinical trials do build capacity, because for our case, we do test vaccines here in KEMRI-Wellcome Trust, vaccines that have been made outside KEMRI-Wellcome Trust, but it's usually led by scientists here in Africa. We do not have any external partners that come and dictate exactly what they would want with these trials. The questions that have been set, but we lead the trials and we look at issues that we may arise ethically or safety with regards to the vaccine. So there are positives to having trials being done in Africa, as opposed to the negatives that we do think of more often than not.
Yeah, and maybe just to add on to that, that's one of the main purposes for this workforce development program, where we want to build that threshold of African-led scientific research, where we're not depending on decision makings coming from the global north, but we're taking lead, as what Bernadette has said. We're taking lead in actually coming up with identifying what our problems are and coming up with the solutions, then working within a collaborative space where, yes, everybody has an interest, everybody at that table has an interest, but are they interests that are symbiotic, where everybody gets to walk away with what brought them there in the first place? So we cannot totally disengage. So it's more of a collaboration effort, which is symbiotic, rather than having one of the stakeholders benefiting at the expense of the other. But for that to happen, then as a global South, we need to already have that capacity where we can be able to sit at the table as technical experts and be able to put forth what we want to work on, with the capacity of knowing that I understand what the situation is, and this is a potential solution that I have, and I'd like to test it out. So it's more of collaboration rather than segregation. That is already with experts at peer level. So there's a question from Abdullahi on the WhatsApp group. So there are already existing alumni groups for the beneficiaries of the different pathways that we have. What you can do in your group, because I'm assuming most of the audience is also part of people interested within this technical space, is just start that group among your friends. And also, since you're already registered for this webinar, what you end up being added onto is to the database. So every time when we're having opportunities, that same database contact is what we'll be using to share out this information. So I hope that is going to be beneficial, but nothing stops you from creating your own WhatsApp groups among friends and among colleagues, where then opportunities can also be shared beyond what we have offered here at KEMRI-Wellcome Trust. There's a question from Ignatius Mwagangi, who's a biomedical science and technology student, fourth-year finalist, and he's asking, given the challenges highlighted in the Valley of Death, where many vaccine candidates fail due to financial and logistical barriers, what strategies or models have been proven most effective in bridging this gap, especially in low and middle income countries?
So I don't have any specific scenario in the low and middle income countries, but I remember one of the faculty members when you were doing the Vaccinology in Africa course, and what she mentioned was that when you're trying to make a vaccine, you'll have to engage the manufacturers like way earlier on, even before you start thinking of its translation into the community. You have to engage them early on, so that one, you do not spend a lot of time in coming up with vaccines that end up in the Valley of Death. So by engaging the manufacturers often, then you will reduce the amount of time and the workload that you'll have in trying to make a vaccine that at the end of it all will be disapproved. So by first having discussions with the manufacturers and discussing the potentials of having a vaccine in the alignment of the research question that you want to answer, that has mitigated a lot of Valley of Death scenarios. But here in Africa, it's a bit different, because in our case, we have not had so many instances where we come up with vaccines and that end up into the manufacturer and that end up into the community. And so looking forward, I just hope that we do not see those cases. But even if we do, mitigating them involves research. I don't see how you'll be able to address those questions without truly proving beyond reasonable doubt that you'll need those vaccines into the population as quickly as possible, because it's going to help with the public health concerns that have been raised. And so by continuously doing research, by continuously collaborating, then we hope to reduce the value of death instances. Especially in the low and middle income setting, in the case where we now end up actually making vaccines for ourselves. Caroline, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I think I'm muted.
Yeah.
There's a question from Rama on given the burden of zoonotic and epidemic diseases in pastoralist regions like the North and Kenya and Rift Valley, how can vaccine development pipelines better incorporate community-level disease knowledge and local epidemiology into early-stage design rather than retrofitting global solutions to local problems?
Thank you for that question. And that question, I'll take it from a book from my mentor, Roger Rimwe, in the case where they did come up with a Rift Valley fever vaccine that would essentially be useful in protecting animals from Rift Valley fever. And so, first of all, he was involved in designing the vaccine. And so he is part and parcel of the community that has experienced or has seen effects of Rift Valley fever on the animals. And so being part of designing the vaccine, of course, of importance is safety and efficacy onto the animals. And taking by the play of book within which he took to design and come up with a vaccine that would be useful in protecting animals from Rift Valley fever, I would approach it in the same way for any other zoonotic infection, in that the people who are on the ground, who have experienced or have the evidence to show that these are the challenges that are resulting from the viruses that are circulating in the population. And we might want to think of a vaccine that not only protects the animals, but also protects the people, then that is the route to go. And we have seen successes with what he has done with Rift Valley fever. And so, yes, involving the community in designing the vaccine is very important, because at least it addresses all the questions that will arise, and hopefully to solve the problems that arise in the community. And I think, for this instance, the community was involved, and at least I have that as an example. I don't know any other examples where a community was not involved and they directly used whatever is outside that is used probably in the Western nations compared to what we have here in Africa. But at least we have one success story that has worked.
Okay. Mutala has asked, can we establish a continental policy requiring institutions that organize or conduct clinical trials in Africa to also invest in basic research and strengthening translational research capacity?
Yeah, I think we can do that, but that will take a lot of lobbying and a lot of numbers to truly justify the need for that policy. So it is possible, though you do need the numbers to truly justify why you'd want that and why that would be important in the community, and have people with the same mindset feed into the idea of having one policy that works for us all. So it is possible.
Okay. We have one hand up from, where is he? I think he's, he's gone down. Do we have any other last minute questions? Any comments for our amazing speaker today? Okay. So I would like to thank Bernadette very much. And Francis, I can see your hand up. Can you unmute? Francis, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick one, maybe as she wraps up. I just wanted to know, probably in terms of infrastructure capacities, in terms of designing of vaccines and development of vaccines. Does Kenya, or by extension African countries, have the capacity, the institutions that we have, for example, here in the country, have the capacity to sort of like design a vaccine and develop it to the level that it just needs to maybe contract manufacturing or extended now manufacturing to large production? Does that capacity exist in our country in fullness, or is when we are setting up the capacity, or what's the level of the capacity that we have in terms of vaccine design and development here in the country? Thanks.
Thank you for the question. Yes, we do have the capacity to actually design vaccines and make the vaccines, because it all starts with basic research and come up with a concept on a type of a vaccine candidate that you'd want to test in the population. So here at Wellcome Trust, we do have the capacity to do that, because as I've mentioned earlier, we were designing dengue vaccine for use in the population. So it is possible to actually make these vaccines, and we do have the minds to actually come up with better strategies when it comes to vaccine design and development. What you don't have is just the manufacturing capability and money, because as I've mentioned, it requires a lot of resources, a lot of money to invest in making a vaccine candidate that winds up to the population. So yeah, we are actually at a good place when it comes to vaccine design.
Bernadette, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for everyone who has attended this webinar. We really are appreciative of the time that you have taken to join us. We would like to hear about your experiences and what else you think, what you'd like for us to discuss in upcoming forums. We value your feedback, because then that is what helps us improve on the experiences when we have these webinars. Before we close, there's a link that I have put on the chat box. Kindly requesting that you take just a few minutes to respond to the post-webinar survey that has been posted. Give us feedback, let us know what you thought of the experience and how best you would want us to improve. So it will take less than 5 minutes. We really value your feedback, and we hope that you'll have a good day, and looking forward to more engagements with you. Thank you very much. Have a good day.